Welcome to The Problem of the Vanished Invalid, a Sherlock Holmes adventure from the series Sherlock Holmes, the Sussex Apocrypha, playing in the year 1906. Upon my friend's passing, I came into possession of his private ledger from his retirement in Sussex. Within its coded pages I found accounts of cases he deemed too strange or sensitive for public consumption. These tales, which I have termed the Sussex Apocrypha, reveal a more contemplative Holmes, facing the mysteries of a rapidly changing world from the quiet of his beekeeping. From these remarkable records I shall begin with a most baffling affair which first came to our attention in Eastbourne. I present to you The Problem of the Vanished Invalid. Chapter 1. In those latter years, Sherlock Holmes had cultivated a peace as profound as the chalk cliffs guarding our Sussex coastline. His retirement was no idle thing. It was a vigorous engagement with the quiet sciences of beekeeping and chemistry, a world away from the fog and clamour of Baker Street. On a particular Tuesday in autumn, a sharp sea breeze rattled the casement windows of his villa, carrying the distant cry of gulls. The steady ticking of the mantel clock and the hum from his apiary were the only sounds to disturb the calm. Then, a new noise, the frantic churning of a motor-car engine, broke the spell. The vehicle crunched to a halt on the gravel drive. I glanced up from my paper as our old friend Dr. Alistair Reed emerged. His haste was foreign to his placid nature. His face was pale, his movements jerky, and he neglected even to straighten his hat. Holmes, observing from his study doorway, stepped out onto the porch. "My dear Reed, your motor has evidently served you well. A desperate journey from Eastbourne, I perceive, concluded with a reckless turn onto my drive. The fine chalk dust on your left spat tells the tale of a hasty departure from the Downs." Deduced Sherlock Holmes. Dr. Reed barely registered the deduction, his face a mask of desperation as he mounted the steps. "Holmes, thank God. I had hoped I would find you." "I am at my wit's end, utterly confounded," Dr. Alistair Reed replied. I ushered him into the sitting-room, where a low fire crackled in the hearth, a welcome counterpoint to the sighing wind. Holmes followed, his academic curiosity sharpening into keen attention. He saw at once this was no social call. "Compose yourself, Reed. Watson, pour the doctor a brandy. Now, begin at the beginning, and articulate the facts of your predicament." Deduced Sherlock Holmes. Reed accepted the glass with a trembling hand, and the spirit at once began to steady him. "It concerns a patient, a gentleman of means, an industrialist named Edgar Prendergast. On my recommendation, he took up residence at the Pines, a most modern convalescent home just outside Eastbourne. It is an establishment famed for its security and its progressive methods," replied Dr. Alistair Reed. "And this Mr. Prendergast has, I take it, absconded?" replied Sherlock Holmes. Holmes's tone held a note of weary disinterest, as if the problem were already solved and found mundane. "Absconded? Holmes, he has vanished! Vanished from a second-floor room, its door locked from the inside. The window was latched, the chimney too narrow for a child." "He is gone, as if into thin air," said Dr. Alistair Reed. From the next room the quiet clink of a glass stirring rod ceased. Holmes turned his head. His grey eyes, clouded moments before with academic thought, now shone with that sharp predatory light I knew so well. The game, as he would say, was afoot. "Pray continue, Reed. A locked-room mystery in a modern sanatorium presents features of novelty," Sherlock Holmes observed sharply. "My reputation is tied to it, you see. I vouched for the Pines. And my own work, my research into experimental pharmacology and the precise effects of rare alkaloids, it all seems a mockery in the face of such an illogical event," responded Dr. Alistair Reed. Holmes stepped fully into the room, his long fingers steepled before him. The languor of the retired country gentleman had evaporated completely. On the contrary, An expert in precise chemical compounds confronted with an imprecise result. The contrast is what gives the problem its charm. The police, I presume, have a predictably prosaic theory. Sherlock Holmes noted. They believe he somehow slipped out and wandered onto the moors. But his sister, Miss Prendergast, is quite unshakable. She insists her brother was too frail, too cowed by his nervous condition, to attempt such a thing. She is on her way here now, Holmes. She is determined to place the matter entirely in your hands, remarked Dr. Alistair Reed. A slow smile touched Holmes's thin lips. He began to pace before the fire, the familiar energy returning to his lanky frame, the floorboards groaning softly with each turn. Excellent. A client with conviction is a formidable weapon, an impossible crime, a distraught relative, and a professional reputation at stake. The elements are aligning splendidly. We shall await the lady's arrival with the keenest anticipation, Sherlock Holmes observed sharply. Dr. Reed had barely finished his disquieting account when the sound of carriage wheels crunching upon the gravel drive drew our attention. A moment later, a sharp rap echoed from the front door. Holmes, who had been listening with a veiled intensity, raised an eyebrow towards Dr. Reed. "That will be the lady in question, I presume. You have been most efficient in your arrangements, Reed," stated Sherlock Holmes. "I felt it best she speak to you directly." "Miss Prendergast is a woman of formidable character, Holmes. She will not be easily dismissed," answered Dr. Alistair Reed. Dr. Reed's assessment proved accurate. The woman who was shown into our sitting room was possessed of a composure that was all the more striking for the evident grief that shadowed her features. She was dressed in sober travelling clothes, and her gaze, though weary, was direct and unflinching. She acknowledged my presence with a slight nod before turning her full attention to my companion. "Mr. Holmes, I am told you are a man who sees truth where others see only confusion. I have come because the police see confusion, and I see an impossibility," answered Miss Lydia Prendergast. Her voice was low, but carried a note of unshakable conviction that commanded the room. "Pray be seated, Miss Prendergast. An impossibility is precisely the sort of trifle that can enliven a dull afternoon on the Sussex Downs." "You refer, of course, to your brother, Mr. Edgar Prendergast," remarked Sherlock Holmes. "They say he wandered off. They suggest his nervous affliction took a sudden turn for the worse, that he became disoriented and simply left. It is a damnable falsehood. My brother was as weak as a newborn kitten. He could scarcely cross a room without assistance, let alone descend 2 stories, and vanish into the night," replied Miss Lydia Prendergast. Holmes leaned forward, the languor of his retirement falling away from him like a discarded cloak. The firelight glinted in his eyes. "Describe the room, madam. Every detail is of the utmost importance," declared Sherlock Holmes. "It is on the 2nd floor of the sanatorium's west wing. There is but 1 door and 1 window. The night nurse found the door locked from the inside. The key was still in the lock. They were compelled to break it down. The window, which gives onto a sheer drop to a flagstone terrace, was found bolted fast, again from the inside. His bed had been slept in, but my brother, Edgar, was gone," replied Miss Lydia Prendergast. The finality with which she spoke sent a small chill through me, despite the warmth from the hearth. A man does not simply evaporate from a sealed chamber. Locked and bolted from within. A classic problem, and yet, always new. "You are quite certain of your brother's physical state? There was no sudden, miraculous recovery?" remarked Sherlock Holmes. "His condition was one of profound nervous exhaustion, Mr. Holmes, not a broken leg. His spirit was weary, and his body had succumbed in sympathy. Dr. Reed can attest to it. He was incapable of such an escape. It was not a departure, it was a removal," Miss Lydia Prendergast answered. Holmes stood and paced before the fire, his hands clasped behind his back. The silence in the room was broken only by the crackle of the logs and the distant bleating of sheep on the downs. After a full minute, he stopped and faced our visitor. "Your conviction, Miss Prendergast, is more compelling than any police report. A frail man cannot climb from a bolted window, nor can he pass through a locked door. Therefore, we must conclude that either the room was not sealed as you believe, or your brother did not leave under his own power. Both avenues present intriguing possibilities," remarked Sherlock Holmes. He turned to our friend, his voice now crisp with renewed energy. "Reed, it appears my retirement is to be postponed. The Sussex bees must fend for themselves for a time. Your problem has become my own. We shall take the first train to Eastbourne in the morning," remarked Sherlock Holmes. The very next morning saw us seated in a first-class carriage, the steady clatter of the wheels on the rails, a constant accompaniment to our journey south. London's grey sprawl had given way to the rolling hills of Surrey, and my companion, Dr. Alistair Reed, sat opposite, his brow furrowed with a professional anxiety that had not lifted since our interview with Miss Prendergast. The gentle sway of the carriage and the hiss of steam from the engine seemed to do little to soothe him. "It is a damnable business, Holmes. I recommended Armitage's establishment myself. It has a reputation for the most modern, most humane methods of care. This affair casts a shadow not only upon a fine institution, but upon my own judgment," remarked Dr. Alistair Reed. Sherlock Holmes, who had been staring intently out of the window as if the passing hedgerows held some profound secret, turned his sharp, hawk-like attention upon our companion. "Reputation, my dear Reed, is what a man is supposed to be. Character is what he is. The same holds true for institutions. These new sanatoriums, with their electrical treatments and psychological regimens, are a fascinating new theatre for human nature. They promise tranquility and science, but beneath that veneer, the old motives of greed, ambition, and desperation still play their parts," declared Sherlock Holmes. He leaned back against the plush velvet of the seat, steepling his long, thin fingers. The train whistle gave a mournful cry as we plunged into a short tunnel, briefly swallowing the carriage in a roaring darkness that was punctuated by the bright flare of Holmes's pipe. "But a man cannot simply evaporate from a locked room, Holmes. The police are convinced he wandered out in a state of confusion, that some door or window was overlooked," Dr. Alistair Reed replied. We emerged back into the daylight. Holmes's voice was crisp and clear as he spoke. "The police are convinced of what is simplest. It is a fatal habit. Let us disregard the impossible and focus on the improbable. We are faced with three pillars of inquiry, upon which this entire case rests," declared Sherlock Holmes. He held up a single finger, his eyes alight with the intellectual fire I knew so well. "First, the man. Edgar Prendergast. According to his sister, he was a creature of profound physical weakness. Could such a man truly overcome a locked door, a second-story window, and the vigilance of an entire staff? Second, the room. We are told it was sealed from within. We must test that assertion with our own eyes. Every lock, every latch, every floorboard becomes a potential witness. And third, and most crucial, the motive. Who benefits from Mr. Prendergast's vanishment? A man does not disappear without creating a vacuum, and it is in that empty space we shall find our culprit," explained Sherlock Holmes. Dr. Reed nodded slowly, the logic of Holmes's approach evidently cutting through his own troubled thoughts. Outside, the landscape was flattening, and I fancied I could detect a fresh, briny tang in the air that blew through the open window. The monotonous beat of the train seemed to quicken, as if eager to deliver us to the puzzle that awaited. "Do not trouble yourself over your recommendation, Doctor. You have inadvertently provided me with a most stimulating problem. A sealed box with the treasure missing. It is a classic of the genre, and I should be very surprised if Dr. Silas Armitage does not hold the key," observed Sherlock Holmes. As he spoke, the train began to slow, its brakes emitting a long metallic sigh. Through the window, the first slate-grey glimpse of the English Channel appeared under a pale sky. Our journey was at an end, and the real investigation was about to begin. Our hansom cab crunched to a halt on a meticulously raked gravel drive. Before us stood the Eastbourne convalescent home, an imposing edifice of white stone and gleaming glass. It seemed to repel the very sea mist clinging to the air. The grounds were profoundly quiet, the only sounds being the distant cry of a gull and the whisper of a sea breeze through immaculate hedgerows. Dr. Reed, my companion, shifted uneasily beside me, a tremor of doubt now evident in the man who had so highly recommended this sterile perfection. "It is a monument to order, is it not, Reed? One might almost believe that illness itself would not dare to trespass upon such pristine grounds," Sherlock Holmes responded. Before Reed could muster a reply, the great oak door swung open with silent, well-oiled precision. A man of medium height and severe aspect stood framed in the entrance. His suit was impeccably tailored, his silvering hair brushed into rigid obedience. His expression was one of practiced professional sympathy. This, I knew at once, must be the director. "Mr. Holmes, I presume?" "And Dr. Reed." "I am Dr. Armitage. Please do come in. It is a most regrettable business that brings you to us," answered Dr. Silas Armitage. His voice was as smooth and polished as the marble floor of the entrance hall. It echoed with the soft, deliberate tread of our footsteps. The air within was cool and faintly scented with antiseptic. As we followed him down a long corridor, I was struck by the absolute regularity of it all. The identical doors, the evenly spaced prints, the funereal hush that absorbed every sound. It felt less a place of healing than a museum of tranquility. Holmes suddenly came to a halt, his gaze fixed upon a juncture in the hallway. To our right, a newer, more modern-looking passage branched off, its architecture subtly different, terminating in a heavy door of reinforced steel. "A recent addition, Doctor," remarked Sherlock Holmes. Dr. Armitage turned, his placid expression unaltered, though I thought I detected a flicker of something in his eyes. "Indeed. Our private staff quarters. We believe a clear demarcation between the professional and personal lives of our attendants is essential for maintaining the serene atmosphere our patients require. My office is this way," answered Dr. Silas Armitage. He gestured to a door just ahead, dismissing the new wing with a practiced wave of his hand. Holmes said nothing more, but I saw his eyes narrow for a fraction of a second as he filed the observation away. Armitage's office was the man himself writ large, orderly, expensive, and devoid of personal clutter. A large mahogany desk sat before a window overlooking the sea, and the only sound was the solemn ticking of a grand mantel clock. "Dr. Armitage, forgive my bluntness, but I cannot reconcile your theory with the man I examined. Mr. Prendergast was physically incapable of such an excursion. His muscular atrophy was significant. He could not have simply walked out." Dr. Alistair Reed replied. Dr. Armitage's voice maintained its calm, reassuring cadence, a stark contrast to Reed's agitation. "The nervous constitution is a fragile and unpredictable thing, as you well know, Doctor. Mr. Prendergast was prone to moments of profound melancholy. We believe that in one such state, he unbolted his door and wandered out towards the cliffs. It is tragic, but not, I fear, altogether mysterious," Dr. Silas Armitage said. "And the door was found unbolted in the morning," Sherlock Holmes said. "No, Mr. Holmes. That is the peculiar detail that so agitated his sister. The door was bolted." "From the inside," answered Dr. Silas Armitage. He delivered this fact as if it were a minor inconvenience. Holmes leaned forward, his lethargy vanishing in an instant, replaced by the familiar, intense gleam of the hunter. "You present a contradiction, Doctor. A man cannot wander out of a room and bolt it from within upon his departure," Sherlock Holmes responded. Armitage replied with a thin, patient smile. "An attendant must have secured the room later, assuming it to be empty, without double-checking. A regrettable lapse in our otherwise strict protocol, to be sure. Human error, I am afraid, is occasionally unavoidable," remarked Dr. Silas Armitage. Holmes sat back, a thoughtful expression on his face. He glanced at the titles on Armitage's bookshelf. his eyes lingering on several volumes concerning advanced neurological theory. The explanation was tidy and logical. It dismissed the entire affair. Yet it was precisely this neatness that seemed to fuel my friend's suspicion. After a moment of silence, punctuated only by the clock, Armitage rose smoothly to his feet. "But you will wish to see for yourselves. If you would be so good as to follow me, I shall take you to the room in question." Dr. Armitage led the way, his polished shoes making no sound upon the thick runner that carpeted the corridor. The air in this wing of the sanatorium was unnaturally still, heavy with the scent of beeswax and some faint, antiseptic aroma. The silence was absolute, broken only by the soft tread of our own feet and the distant rhythmic ticking of a grand hall clock, each beat marking time in this place, where time itself was meant to stand still. His voice was a low, measured hum, perfectly suited to the tranquil surroundings. "Here we are, gentlemen. Mr. Prendergast's room, just as the orderly found it this morning." "We have, of course, touched nothing," answered Dr. Silas Armitage. He produced a key and turned it in the lock. The click of the mechanism was startlingly loud in the profound quiet. The door swung inwards to reveal a room bathed in the soft grey light of the coastal morning. It was impeccably tidy. A bed with covers turned down, a book lying open on the nightstand, a dressing gown draped over a chair. Yet for all its order, the room felt profoundly empty. A window, securely barred with ornate ironwork, looked out upon the manicured lawns. "Good heavens," he murmured, his tone one of genuine bewilderment. The sister was quite correct. The bars on that window would deter a cat burglar, let alone a man in Prendergast's frail condition, Dr. Alistair Reed replied. Holmes said nothing but swept into the room with the predatory grace of a hunting hound on a fresh scent. His eyes, bright and alert, missed nothing. He strode first to the door, ignoring us completely as he dropped to one knee. I watched as he examined the heavy brass bolt that was set into the doorframe. It was this bolt, we had been told, that had been found shot home from the inside. His voice was a low rumble, almost to himself. "Interesting. Most interesting," Sherlock Holmes pointed out. He produced his powerful pocket lens and directed it at the brass housing into which the bolt slid. He remained crouched for a full minute, his back a rigid line of concentration. When he rose, his expression was as inscrutable as ever, but I had seen him trace a line with his fingertip, a line so faint I could not discern it from my position. A note of impatience crept into the doctor's otherwise placid voice. "Mr. Holmes, if you find something amiss, I must insist," replied Dr. Silas Armitage. Holmes held up a hand, silencing him without a glance. He had moved to the centre of the room, his gaze now fixed upon the keyhole of the very door through which we had entered. Once more the lens was brought to his eye. With the delicacy of a surgeon, he then produced a pair of fine tweezers from his waistcoat pocket, and probed gently at the dark opening of the lock's escutcheon. He drew something out, a minuscule fragment, almost invisible to the naked eye. He laid it carefully upon a clean page of his notebook. It was a wisp of dark thread, no more than a quarter-inch in length, which appeared to have a faint, waxy sheen. Without a word of explanation, he folded the paper and slipped it into his pocket. Dr. Armitage's professional composure began to fray at the edges. He exchanged a look of profound bewilderment with Dr. Reed, who seemed equally at a loss. "Mr. Holmes, I must insist. What is the meaning of this? A scratch on the bolt, a piece of thread. These are hardly clues to a man's disappearance," said Dr. Silas Armitage. Holmes, however, seemed not to hear him. He turned on his heel, his energy suddenly renewed, as if the final piece of an internal puzzle had clicked into place. "This room has told us its story. Now, I should like to examine the grounds. A man cannot simply dissolve into the air, Doctor. He must leave a trace somewhere," Sherlock Holmes said. And with that he swept past us and out of the room, leaving us to follow in the wake of his singular purpose, the mystery of the sealed chamber deepening with every step we took. Leaving the oppressive silence of the sealed chamber behind us, Holmes suggested a turn about the grounds. The morning air was sharp and carried the salty tang of the nearby sea, a welcome restorative after the stale atmosphere of the sanatorium. A fine dew lay upon the manicured lawns, glittering like a carpet of diamonds in the nascent sunlight. Our footsteps were the only sound, a steady, rhythmic crunch upon the gravel path that wound between severe-looking rose bushes, their thorny branches bare of blossom. I was still pondering the significance of the waxed thread and the almost invisible scratch upon the bolt, but Holmes, I could tell, had already moved his formidable mind beyond them, using them not as an answer in themselves, but as a lens through which to view the next piece of evidence. He stopped so abruptly that I nearly collided with him. His gaze was fixed, not upon the horizon or some distant feature, but upon a patch of lawn some 20 yards from the main building. There, in stark and bewildering contrast to the moist, dark green of the grass, lay a small, perfectly square bundle of white. "Curious, Watson." "Very curious indeed," Sherlock Holmes said. We approached the object. It was a set of bedsheets, laundered to a brilliant white and folded with a precision that would have done credit to a royal valet. They were utterly immaculate and, as Holmes noted by touching a corner with his fingertip, entirely dry. At that moment a young man in an orderly's uniform, carrying a metal pail, came around the corner of a hedge. He froze upon seeing us, his eyes widening with an unmistakable look of panic. "Good morning. These linens, I presume, are yours?" Sherlock Holmes observed sharply. His voice was deceptively mild, yet the orderly flinched as if struck. "Ah, yes, sir. That is, they are the sanatorium's. I was just about to collect them." "I left them to air," said a sanatorium orderly. "To air? In the damp of the early morning?" "An odd choice," replied Sherlock Holmes. The young man began to stammer, twisting the handle of his pail. "It was the liniment, you see. Mr. Prendergast. He spilled a bottle of it late last night. A dreadful, pungent odour, sir, quite foul. I couldn't have the whole wing smelling of it, so I took the sheets straight away." "Dr. Armitage, you understand, is most particular," answered a sanatorium orderly. Holmes tilted his head, his expression one of polite interest. "And the laundry was in operation at such an hour?" Sherlock Holmes responded. "We have a small unit in the basement, sir. Steam-powered. For contagion control, mostly, so it can be fired up at a moment's notice for urgent matters," answered a sanatorium orderly. He glanced nervously from Holmes to me, wringing his hands on the pail's handle. "I thought it best to handle it myself, quietly, so as not to disturb anyone." "The smell, you understand," remarked a sanatorium orderly. The explanation was, on its surface, entirely plausible. It was delivered, however, with the frantic energy of a man reciting a poorly memorized play. Holmes let the silence stretch for a moment before he spoke again, his voice losing its gentle curiosity and taking on a keen metallic edge. "You tell me of a foul-smelling liniment, a spill so significant it required the immediate and clandestine operation of a steam laundry. Yet look here," Sherlock Holmes pointed out. He gestured with his cane to the grass, all around the folded sheets. "The dew is undisturbed, the sheets are perfectly dry, and the air carries only the scent of salt and moist earth. Your story, my good man, is as clean and as unnaturally placed as this linen. You may go," Sherlock Holmes pointed out. The orderly, pale and trembling, needed no second invitation. He scurried away, leaving the pail clattering in his wake. I stared at the sheets, then back at my friend. "What does it mean, Holmes?" He was clearly lying, but to what end? Asked Dr. John Watson. Holmes picked up the bundle. It was surprisingly light. He did not look at me, but stared back towards the imposing facade of the sanatorium. His eyes narrowed in thought. "It means, my dear Watson, that these sheets were not brought out here to be aired. Their placement was an act of hasty concealment, interrupted by our arrival. They were not used to clean a spill. They were used, I believe, as a rope. Come, we have learnt all we can from the grounds. The true purpose of this linen, I suspect, is a secret that lies waiting for us back in that room," deduced Sherlock Holmes. We returned to Mr. Prendergast's room, the scene of his inexplicable vanishing. The silence within was profound, broken only by the distant, rhythmic crash of waves against the Eastbourne shore. Holmes had said little since our encounter with the nervous orderly, but I could see by the tight set of his jaw and the restless energy in his eyes that his mind was working at a furious pace upon the problem of the laundered bedsheets. A steam-powered laundry for a single set of soiled linens. Read. An explanation so perfectly constructed that it cannot possibly be true. It is a work of fiction, designed to conceal a far simpler and therefore more sinister truth, declared Sherlock Holmes. Holmes paced the length of the room, his long fingers steepled before him. Dr. Reed, however, ignored my friend's restless movements. The physician's eye had been drawn to the small bedside table, where a single delicate teacup sat beside a carafe of water. Reed approached it, his steps quiet on the thick carpet. He was to have taken his evening broth in this, I believe. Miss Prendergast mentioned it, answered Dr. Alistair Reed. Reed picked up the cup, turning it over in the pale morning light that filtered through the tall windows. He sniffed its rim, his brow furrowed in concentration. Then, drawing a small but powerful pocket lens from his waistcoat, he began to examine the bottom of the cup with an intensity that commanded our immediate attention. A faint scratching sound reached my ears as the metal edge of his lens grazed the porcelain. "Holmes, come and look at this. There is a residue here, a faint crystalline deposit." Holmes ceased his pacing and was at the doctor's side in an instant. I watched as Reed, the sudden tremor of excitement in his voice, continued his examination. "Good heavens! The structure is unmistakable. The acicular crystals." "I know this compound," remarked Dr. Alistair Reed. "You are certain?" Sherlock Holmes observed sharply. "Absolutely. It is no mere laudanum or chloral hydrate. This is an experimental alkaloid, a derivative of hyoscine. I have been following its development for my own research. Only last month, an article in a German toxicology journal detailed its properties, a potent sedative that leaves the system with remarkable speed. It is not available on the open market. Indeed, I would wager there are fewer than a dozen men in all of England who would even know of its existence," replied Dr. Alistair Reed. Dr. Reed set the cup down with a decisive click, his face grim. The implications of his discovery hung in the air, as tangible as the scent of antiseptic that permeated the sanatorium. "Then our quarry is no common kidnapper. He is a man of advanced science, a man with access to the very latest and perhaps most obscure corners of pharmacology, a man who would also understand the necessity of removing bedsheets contaminated not by liniment, but perhaps by the effects of such a drug," stated Sherlock Holmes. Holmes's eyes gleamed with a fierce, cold light. The two disparate clues, the laundered sheets and the drugged teacup, had locked together, forming a single, terrifying picture. Such a man, with such knowledge, must surely reside within these walls. I believe it is time I had a more philosophical discussion with the director of this fine establishment. Come, Reed, let us see what Dr. Armitage has to say about the crushing cost of true innovation, Sherlock Holmes noted. Armed with Dr. Reed's unsettling discovery, Holmes secured an interview with Dr. Silas Armitage. We were shown into the director's private office, a room that aimed for academic solemnity yet betrayed a frantic energy. Books on neurology and psychology were stacked high on every surface, spilling from shelves onto the floor. The air, thick with the scent of old paper and leather, was undercut by a sharper, almost chemical tang. A grand long-case clock in the corner marked the passing seconds, with a heavy, insistent tick, the only sound. "Your establishment is most impressive, Doctor." "A testament to modern methods," Sherlock Holmes observed sharply. Holmes began, his tone betraying only mild professional curiosity. Dr. Armitage, a gaunt man with a feverish intensity in his eyes, gestured for us to sit. He leaned forward over his vast mahogany desk, his fingers steepled. "Modern methods are merely the first step, Mr. Holmes. The medical establishment is a behemoth, mired in the past. They content themselves with rest cures and gentle distractions, while the human mind, the greatest frontier of all, remains uncharted territory." Dr. Silas Armitage replied. His voice, at first measured, took on a fervent cadence. He spoke not like a physician, but like a prophet. "We sedate, we soothe, we manage. But to truly cure, to rewire the afflicted mind and restore it to its full potential, that requires vision. It requires a willingness to abandon the hidebound traditions that stifle true progress," responded Dr. Silas Armitage. As Armitage expounded on his revolutionary philosophies, I saw Holmes's gaze drift from the doctor's face to the desk itself. My gaze followed his. Beside a silver inkstand sat a precarious stack of papers, held down by a glass paperweight. They were not scholarly articles, but invoices, their headers stark and demanding. Several bore a threatening red stamp, a noble ambition indeed. But such pioneering work must carry a considerable expense, deduced Sherlock Holmes. Holmes's comment, delivered with such casualness that it seemed a mere conversational pleasantry, nonetheless found its mark. A shadow passed over Armitage's face, and he gestured vaguely towards his library of books. "It is the crushing cost of true innovation. The equipment, the chemical compounds, the refusal of the old guard to fund anything that frightens them. They would rather see a man like Prendergast waste away from his own anxieties than risk a genuine, lasting cure. To achieve greatness, one must sometimes seek unconventional means of support." Dr. Silas Armitage answered. The bitterness in his tone was sharp enough to cut glass. He spoke of Mr. Prendergast as a specimen, a problem to be solved rather than a patient to be cared for. Holmes rose to his feet, his expression unreadable. "You have given me a great deal to consider, Doctor. Unconventional means are, after all, my own stock in trade. I believe we have taken enough of your valuable time," stated Sherlock Holmes. Before Armitage could reply, a sharp, deferential rap sounded on the heavy oak door. The director, startled from his passionate reverie, called out to enter. The door creaked open, revealing a young nurse, her face flushed with urgency. She ignored us, addressing her employer directly, her voice trembling with the weight of her news. We waited in a small, sterile sitting room, the air thick with the scent of beeswax and carbolic. Through the tall window the grey sea churned under a matching sky, its monotonous roar a constant companion. Holmes stood by the glass, his back to us, a figure of intense concentration. He had said nothing since our interview with Dr. Armitage, and I knew better than to disturb him. Dr. Reed, however, could not be still, his agitation wearing a path in the threadbare carpet. The ticking of a grand clock in the hall seemed to measure his anxiety. Suddenly, a new sound intruded, the crunch of heavy boots on the gravel drive, followed by a sharp, authoritative rap at the main door. Moments later, the door was thrust open, and a police constable, face ruddy from the sea wind, stood panting on the threshold. His voice was a booming gust of wind in the quiet room. "Mr. Holmes? Dr. Reed? I've news! Capital news, I should think. We've had a sighting," a local police constable said. Reed stopped his pacing, his expression a mixture of hope and disbelief. "A sighting? Of Prendergast?" responded Dr. Alistair Reed. "The very man. Ticket agent at the station. Name of Hobbs. Remembers him clear as day. Said a gentleman matching Mr. Prendergast's description. Looking pale and a bit lost. Purchased a third-class ticket for Victoria Station, not 2 hours ago. The London train has just departed. We've telegraphed ahead to have the Metropolitan Police meet him on the platform. remarked a local police constable. A wave of relief washed over Dr. Reed's features. He looked from the constable to me, as if his initial fears of a simple wanderer had been confirmed. Holmes, however, had turned slowly from the window. His face was a mask of utter impassivity, save for the cold, calculating light that flickered in his eyes. His voice, when it came, was dangerously soft. And his attire? Constable. Did this pale gentleman travel in his nightclothes and dressing gown? Explained Sherlock Holmes. The officer stammered, his confidence faltering. Well, no, sir. Hobbs described a tweed travelling suit. A bit worn, he said, remarked a local police constable. How very convenient, Holmes murmured, his eyes glinting. A man too weak to cross his own bedroom suddenly finds the strength to dress himself in a full suit that is not in his wardrobe, walk a mile to the station, and board a train for London. Deduced Sherlock Holmes. He turned his piercing gaze upon Reed. Tell me, Doctor, does that sound like the patient you described? Declared Sherlock Holmes. Reed's voice trembled slightly. No, Holmes, it does not. It is quite impossible, Dr. Alistair Reed said. Holmes addressed the deflated constable, his tone now sharp and dismissive. You may recall your men from their wild goose chase. You have not found Mr. Prendergast. You have found precisely what you were intended to find. A distraction. Someone has paid a man of similar build to enact this little pantomime, and in doing so, has bought themselves precious time. Time for the official inquiry to look anywhere but here. You have been expertly misled. Good day, explained Sherlock Holmes. The constable, his face a study in confusion, mumbled an apology and retreated, his boots echoing his defeat down the hall. Dr. Reed stared at Holmes, his earlier relief replaced by a profound sense of dread. But Holmes, if that was a deception, then this affair is far more sinister than I imagined. Dr. Alistair Reed replied. My friend did not reply at once. He had already dismissed the false sighting, his mind vaulting ahead to the true heart of the puzzle. He crossed the room to stand once more before the open door of Edgar Prendergast's chamber, his gaze fixed not on the empty space, but upon the bed itself. He spoke, almost to himself, his voice a low hum of dawning certainty. Sinister, yes. And yet the mechanics of it are quite elementary. The solution was never to be found on a railway platform. It has been here all along, neatly folded and waiting to be read, declared Sherlock Holmes. The official investigation, spurred on by the false report of a man boarding the London train, had departed with a great clamour of boots on gravel. Now, a deceptive peace settled over the sanatorium gardens. A gentle breeze rustled the leaves of the great oak under which we stood, and from the direction of the sea the faint, mournful cry of a gull reached us. Dr. Reed, however, seemed oblivious to the calm, his brow furrowed with a lingering confusion. But Holmes, a positive identification. The constable was certain. Why would you dismiss it so readily? It seems the most logical explanation for his disappearance, said Dr. Alistair Reed. He spoke without turning, his gaze fixed upon the window of the vanished man's room. Because, my dear Reed, it is a logic designed to be followed by the unimaginative. It is a signpost pointing down the wrong road. The true solution lies not at a distant railway station, but right here, Sherlock Holmes observed sharply. He gestured towards the building. I could see he was leading the doctor towards a conclusion, step by painstaking step. Consider the facts you yourself provided. Mr. Prendergast was administered a potent sedative by the night orderly. He was, by all accounts, in a profound slumber. And yet we are to believe he awoke, neatly folded the sheets upon his bed, and absconded, declared Sherlock Holmes. When you put it so plainly, it does seem improbable, replied Dr. Alistair Reed. His voice grew sharp, cutting through the tranquil air. It is not improbable, Doctor. It is impossible. The folded sheets were not a sign of a tidy departure. They were a signal that they had served their purpose. Knotted together, They would form a rope of sufficient length and strength to lower a dead weight from that second-story window," replied Sherlock Holmes. Dr. Reed gasped, his face paling at the image Holmes had so starkly painted. He took a half-step back, the gravel crunching under his heel. "Lowered him? But the room was bolted from the inside." "We both saw it. The bolt was shot home," responded Dr. Alistair Reed. He replied with the quiet confidence of a lecturer concluding a proof. "Ah, the locked room. The most elegant feature of the entire affair. It required no key, merely a bit of ingenuity. A fine, stiff wire pushed through the keyhole would be sufficient to nudge the end of the bolt into its housing. Just enough to hold it in place," Sherlock Holmes responded. Holmes paused, letting the silence hang for a moment before delivering the final, critical detail. Then, a simple loop of thread, placed over the bolt's handle beforehand, would be pulled from the hallway. This action draws the bolt fully across, securing the door. The thread is then pulled free, leaving but one trace: the minute scratch I observed upon the brass housing, where the wire's tip scraped against it as the bolt was nudged. A simple trick, but devastatingly effective. The entire diabolical scheme was laid bare. The drugged patient, the complicit orderly, the makeshift rope, and the illusion of an impossible escape. Reed stood speechless, his medical mind struggling to reconcile this cold logic with the tranquil reputation of the establishment he had so highly recommended. He turned to me then, his expression all business. "Prefix the lightly. How is solved, Watson? The orderly was merely the muscle. Now we must uncover the brain. I believe a trip to the post office is in order." A few well-placed telegrams should illuminate the true architect of this affair, and more importantly, his motive. Sherlock Holmes responded, and with that he strode towards the gates, leaving Dr. Reed and myself to stare at the vacant window, the placid facade of the sanatorium now seeming to hold a most sinister countenance. My mind still reeled from Holmes's masterful dissection of the locked room puzzle. The simple thread and wire, so fiendishly employed to create an illusion of impossibility, was a testament to a criminal intellect of the first order. Yet, as we stood within the bustling confines of the Eastbourne post office, the question of how was supplanted by the far more troubling question of why. The air was thick with the scent of sealing wax and damp ink. The sharp, rhythmic clatter of the telegraph key from behind the counter formed a relentless backdrop to my thoughts. Holmes, however, had seemingly left the mechanics of the crime behind him. He moved with a crisp, nervous energy, his pen scratching furiously across a stack of telegram forms. 3 he dispatched in quick succession, the clerk stamping each with a decisive thud. He then paced the public area, his long fingers steepled before him, his gaze fixed upon the clock as if he could will its hands to move faster. "To whom are you wiring, Holmes?" "Scotland Yard," Dr. John Watson inquired. "No, my dear Watson. The Yard is a bulldog. It requires a scent to follow. I am merely preparing the trail. One wire is to my agent, Barker, concerning the financial ledgers of a certain Dr. Silas Armitage. Another is to a medical supplier in Lambeth, and the third to an electrical instrument manufacturer of my acquaintance in Berlin," deduced Sherlock Holmes. "But what have his finances or his suppliers to do with the disappearance of Mr. Prendergast?" wondered Dr. John Watson. He stopped his pacing and finally turned to me, his grey eyes alight with the fire of the chase. A faint smile touched his lips. "When we first toured the sanatorium, did you not remark upon the stark contrast between the faded gentility of the patient wings and the gleaming modernity of what Dr. Armitage referred to as his private research laboratory? All that polished nickel and vulcanite, Watson. Such apparatus is not purchased with good intentions alone. It requires significant capital. Capital which I suspect our philanthropic doctor does not possess," observed Sherlock Holmes. Before I could press him further, the telegraph machine fell silent, then abruptly sprang to life again, with an incoming message. The clerk scribbled dutifully, tore the sheet, and slid it into a buff envelope, then called Holmes's name. My friend snatched the telegram and ripped it open, his eyes scanning the lines with ferocious speed. A moment later, a second message arrived, which he devoured with equal intensity. "Well, Holmes, what news?" Dr. John Watson commented. He did not reply at once, but folded the papers carefully and placed them in his breast pocket. He looked at me, and all trace of levity had vanished from his face, replaced by a grim certainty. "The news is as I expected, and it is damning. Dr. Armitage is on the verge of financial ruin, his credit stretched to the breaking point. And yet in the last 6 months, he has taken delivery of a galvanic battery of immense power and a set of surgical instruments so specialized they could have only one purpose," observed Sherlock Holmes. The final pieces of the puzzle clicked into place in my own mind. They formed a picture of such cold-blooded ambition that it chilled me to the bone. "Good heavens, Holmes! You mean to say," remarked Dr. John Watson. His voice was low and hard as granite. "I mean to say that Dr. Armitage is a man possessed by a theory he lacks the funds and the ethical standing to test. In Edgar Prendergast he saw not a patient, but an opportunity, a wealthy, isolated subject upon whom he could conduct his radical and unsanctioned experiments." "This was no flight of a disturbed mind, Watson. This was a kidnapping of the most calculated and despicable sort," replied Sherlock Holmes. He turned on his heel, his coat swirling around him, and strode towards the door. The sounds of the post office seemed to fade, replaced by an urgent and terrible purpose. "Come, Watson, we have our motive and our man. It is time we paid another visit to the good doctor," replied Sherlock Holmes. The telegrams in Holmes's pocket seemed to hum with a malevolent energy, a silent, ominous vibration against his coat as we ascended the grand staircase of the sanatorium. Our footsteps were muffled by a thick Persian runner, yet the silence of the house felt heavy, expectant. Dr. Reed, his face a mask of grim resolve, walked beside me, the leather of his physician's bag creaking as he clutched it tight. At the end of the corridor, a heavy oak door stood closed. Holmes did not knock, but turned the brass handle, which gave a soft, oily click, and pushed it open. Dr. Armitage sat behind a vast mahogany desk, a pool of lamplight illuminating the papers before him. The air was thick with the scent of leather bindings and aged paper. A tall clock ticked away the seconds in a corner, each beat a small hammer blow against the quiet. He looked up, his expression one of carefully managed surprise, though I saw a flicker of something else in his eyes. The guarded look of a chess player who sees his opponent make an unexpected, threatening move. "Mr. Holmes, to what do I owe this unscheduled visit?" "I trust you have some news regarding our unfortunate patient," responded Dr. Silas Armitage. His voice was as smooth and polished as the desk before him, a carefully modulated baritone that held no warmth. "I have news regarding your victim, Doctor." "Let us dispense with the pleasantries. We are here to discuss the abduction of Mr. Edgar Prendergast, an act orchestrated and executed by you," Sherlock Holmes noted. The ticking of the clock seemed to grow louder in the ensuing silence. Armitage's face paled, but he forced a short, incredulous laugh, a dry, brittle sound that did not reach his eyes. "Abduction? The word is absurd. The man was unwell. He wandered away," responded Dr. Silas Armitage. "He did not wander. He was drugged with a potent sedative, a fact our good Dr. Reed can attest to, administered by an orderly named Finch, a man whose gambling debts you recently and generously settled. He was then lowered from his window, unconscious, using 2 bedsheets, knotted together with a most proficient carrick bend," explained Sherlock Holmes. Holmes paused, his eyes fixed on the director. Dr. Reed gave a short, sharp nod of confirmation, his sharp intake of breath audible in the stillness. Armitage's composure was beginning to fray. A faint sheen of perspiration had appeared on his brow. "But your masterstroke, I must confess, was the illusion of the locked room. After lowering your patient, you used a fine waxed thread, looped around the handle of the bolt and passed through the keyhole. to slide it back into its housing from the corridor. A simple tug, a retrieved thread, and the room was sealed. An impossible crime for the local constabulary, but a mere parlour trick for a man of your ingenuity. Armitage slammed his palm down upon the desk. The sudden sound startled me, a sharp report that sent a pen skittering across the polished wood and shattered the room's oppressive quiet. His mask of civility fell away, revealing a face twisted with a fanatic's fire. "You see only the mechanics. You cannot comprehend the purpose. Prendergast is not a victim. He is a vessel for the greatest medical advancement of our age. His particular malady, the fragility of his mind, it is the perfect ground upon which to build a new science of the soul. I am curing him, Mr. Holmes, in a way no other man on earth could," answered Dr. Silas Armitage. His voice had risen to a passionate, almost evangelical pitch, his breath coming in short, sharp bursts. He was no longer a physician but a zealot, his ambition a terrible burning thing. "This is monstrous, Silas. You have betrayed every oath we hold sacred." "This is not medicine. It is butchery in the name of ego," replied Dr. Alistair Reed. "Sacred oaths do not push mankind forward. They hold us back. Greatness requires sacrifice," answered Dr. Silas Armitage. Holmes stepped forward, the soft scuff of his shoe on the rug the only sound for a moment. His expression was cold as granite. He cut through the doctor's tirade with a voice that was low and dangerously sharp, a blade of pure logic against the man's heated mania. "You have sacrificed another man's liberty for your own ambition. You have turned a house of healing into a private laboratory and a prison. The philosophy of it can be debated in court. For now, there is only one question of importance." "Where is he, Doctor?" Sherlock Holmes noted. With Dr. Armitage's chilling confession still hanging in the air of his study, Holmes wasted not a moment. He led us, not towards the well-appointed patient wings, but down a narrow service stairwell hidden behind a tapestry. The air grew colder, thick, with the scent of damp stone and disinfectant. At the bottom, behind a stack of linen chests, we discovered a heavy door of reinforced oak, a thing utterly out of place. Holmes produced a key he had taken from Armitage's desk, and with a grating turn of the lock, the door groaned inwards. The room beyond was not a chamber of horrors, but something far more unsettling. A pristine, modern medical ward in miniature. A single gas lamp hissed softly, casting a sterile glow upon a neatly made bed, and in that bed lay Mr. Edgar Prendergast. He was pale and thin, his eyes vacant as he stared at the ceiling, but he was breathing, alive. A collective sigh of relief escaped our lips. Miss Prendergast rushed forward, her composure finally breaking. Her voice was a choked whisper, trembling with a week of held-back fear. "Edgar! Oh, my dear Edgar, is it truly you?" remarked Miss Lydia Prendergast. Her brother turned his head slowly, a flicker of confused recognition in his eyes. He was disoriented, clearly under the influence of some sedative, but unharmed. As his sister wept softly by his side, our friend Dr. Reed made a swift examination, his face a mixture of professional calm and personal fury. We saw Armitage but once more, a man diminished, his face a mask of cold pride, as two constables escorted him from his own establishment. The sharp slam of the carriage door echoed up from the drive, a final, punctuating sound to his failed ambition. Hours later, the rhythmic clatter of the rails against the wheels provided a hypnotic counterpoint to the turmoil of the day. We had left the grim sanatorium behind, and now, in a first-class carriage bound for Sussex, the rolling hills offered a soothing balm after its stark confinement. Mr. Prendergast, now under his sister's care in another compartment, was sleeping soundly. Dr. Reed, however, stared grimly into the gathering dusk. His voice was low, heavy with remorse. "I shall never forgive myself, Holmes. I recommended that place. I sent him to that laboratory." Dr. Alistair Reed answered. Holmes, who had been watching the smoke from a distant farmhouse curl into the sky, now turned his gaze upon him. "Your intentions were sound, Doctor. You sought healing for a friend. It is Armitage who perverted the very meaning of the word. He saw not a patient to be cured, but an opportunity to be seized, a subject for his grand theories," Sherlock Holmes said. I watched my friend. His sharp features softened in the warm lamplight of the carriage. He was no longer the hunter, but the philosopher. His vanity was the critical clue. "Do you recall the faint, sweet scent in his study? It was not a common antiseptic. It was chloral hydrate, not enough for a patient's dose, but precisely what one would use to maintain a subject in a state of prolonged placidity. It was the scent of a prison, not a place of convalescence. Ambition is a noble engine, but when it is uncoupled from compassion, it becomes a monstrous thing, turning a house of healing into a cage," Sherlock Holmes noted. Holmes fell silent then, leaving his words to settle between us. Outside, the train's whistle blew a long, mournful note as we plunged into the darkness. We were returning to the familiar comforts of London, yet I knew the memory of this place, where the pursuit of knowledge had become a terrifying trap, would not be so easily left behind.